What's up, guys? I'm SaltEMike, and this is your weekend review for July 6th, 2020. Just a quick note to start the video is my work schedule is finally starting to even out. I have a decent amount of days off now, and the only issue was my Sunday start time was really early in the morning, so I could barely even stream and definitely couldn't do and answer the call. So I found somebody that'll switch for me later in the day, so hopefully that switch gets accepted, and then we should have Answer the Call back next week. So I'm really excited for that, so keep an eye out for it. Now, moving right into the video, we would normally start out with the patch notes updates, but 3.10 is still an evocati. So we did have a monthly report, and what's kind of cool, what CIG is doing now is when Jared and ISC kind of takes in a hiatus, we get these kind of deep dives into what's going on still for people that love to follow the project like myself, and obviously like you guys that are taking a look at Star Citizen's development weekly with me here. So we did have a monthly report, and they started out with FPS AI, and a lot of what it's discussed here is stuff that we've seen already, which is the reloading aspect of the AI. We talked about it last week, but what was interesting that they talked about in this post is that work on the bartender actually made this possible. So a lot of people like to kind of make fun of the fact that they're working on a bartender, but the work made actual missions that we enjoy in the game more interesting. So pretty cool. And the biggest thing here is they spent time completing tasks for the server meshing implementation. And this is big. Server meshing is one of those things that will decide whether or not the vision of Star Citizen is even possible. So the fact that like going way back months and months and months ago, possibly even a year ago, Luke Presley was on Star Citizen Live, and they talked about how they don't really want to do work that they're going to have to constantly redo for things like server-side OCS and things like server meshing. So the fact that they're starting to do work, at least on the AI, for implementation of server meshing means that it's on the horizon. The tunnel, the end of the tunnel might be far away, but we can actually see the light of it, which is really nice. They then moved on to Ship AI, where they talked about making what they called a standalone quantum travel linking system, which is basically you and an NPC linking in quantum travel rather than you and another live player. And this is really being used for Squadron 42, but that can translate into the PU eventually, where you can hire an NPC and have him protect you and follow you around in quantum travel. Really good. Really useful for what may look like a real game sometime in the future for Star Citizen. Environment art. Full production of Pyro 3 and 4 is in progress, as well as a lot of new art assets are being created for this system. But what they touched on really in this post, and what they focused on, I guess, in June, was touch blending. And what that means is, like, when you walk through a plant, the plant reacts naturally to how your leg would brush over it or something. This is something we've seen them work on in the past, but I guess it needed a little additional work for Pyro. Then ship art. This is actually kind of exciting. Some exciting ships here. They continue work on the Hercules Starlifter, and the last area to work on for this ship in particular is the cargo door / ramp, which is, I assume, similar functionality to the way the Carrack works. Then they completed the rec room, the kitchen, and the dining room this past month, and the exterior is now in final art. Very exciting. A lot of people are looking forward to cargo hauling in this ship. The Caterpillar will not be the end-all and be-all anymore, which is pretty cool. The 100i made great progress, as well as 2 unannounced ships are making progress as well. And then from the US team, the Star Runner has made a lot of progress also. It's also in final art, but it needs feedback because if you've ever seen Crusader ships, they look very high-tech, and this ship is meant to be a smuggling ship. So how do you make a high-tech ship look like a smuggling ship? So they have to kind of fit some personality in there somewhere. The GN Scout is also getting some work done. We talked about that last week. They had a post on it, so just kind of adding to what they did in June here. Then for weapons art, strong development going on with the weapons coming into 3.10, because obviously 3.10, all of those weapons are now in polishing and are going to be coming into the patch. They touched on something called the BR2. I'm not sure what that is. It's not on the 310 roadmap, not on the 311. So leave a comment below and let me know if you know what that weapon is, but I'm not familiar with it. Then backend services. We will definitely touch a bit more on this later when we talk about the Postmortem, but a lot of work needs to be done to resolve the issues that we dealt with in both 3.8 and 3.9. What they worked on in June was more monitoring and finding these issues so they can fix them quicker, and as well as some updates to improve some of the issues that we were dealing with. They basically talked about live services, so I want to touch on what live services actually are in case you don't know. They could be the things that make sure to stay live, like the website, stores in game, stores on the website, as well as your ship purchases, the amount of AUEC you have, the amount of ships that you purchase, components, things like that. Those are all touched with live services and the backend services teams. Moving on to characters, Moby-Glass work was a focus in this month from the excerpt. It looks like the setup basically was done this month to make sure that you can buy a Moby-Glass when like unequipping and re-equipping them. And this might fix a problem that I was dealing with, and a lot of you probably were as well, is where you were missing a Moby-Glass in 3.9. It was pretty frustrating. They also began work on the Pyro Crab, which is kind of surprising. I don't expect to see this thing for a long time, but it's still kind of cool, a cool concept to talk about. Then engineering. I don't know what 10% of this stuff means. I saw server meshing mentioned earlier. I saw a lot of work mentioned on the new renderer here. If you're into this stuff, please leave a comment below. Help educate me, but not only me, people that don't follow the project, aren't game developers, things like that. Your comments can help down below, as I'm just unable to add any more to than engineering work happened in June. So yeah, take a look in the comments below, and hopefully some people made some comments there. As far as gameplay features, the trading app is coming in 3.10, as well as paints into the in-game shops for in-game credit purchases. Pretty exciting there. Vehicle features, quick update basically about the future of docking here, as well as missile improvements. For me, missiles have been the biggest issue in Star Citizen's current PvP feel, and from every standpoint, as far as missiles, like locking, removing missile locks, all sorts of things. They just need a lot of work, and excited to see that they're prepping for progress on that. For the graphics section, more Gen 12 renderer dirty talk. This is basically one of the key features, again, like server meshing, that will decide whether Star Citizen is even possible. Because right now, looking at the game, 50 players per server, low frame rates, there's lots of things that make it feel like it may never be possible, and that's why you're seeing a lot of like Star Citizen hit pieces, things like that, because it just doesn't look possible right now. So when these things come in, we'll find out if it is or if it isn't. View distance was also discussed here, specifically on ships, but I actually want to touch on what I think is the biggest issue with FPS combat, and that's view distance. So hopefully the work that goes into the ship view distance can be applied to your FPS experience. Anyone that's played some survival games like DayZ or any BR will know that you can snipe people from far, like 1,000-meter distances, right? And we can't even see a player at, I think, 100 or 250 meters. And in a lot of cases, if you can see them and you actually hit the target, nothing even happens. So there's like a lot of distance issues when it comes to FPS combat, so hopefully we see some changes there. And lastly, with the monthly report, is a VFX update on signed distance fields. So that's basically what will bring our new shield tech, as well as atmospheric entry effects to happen. And they just touched on, they're very excited to see our beauty shots, because, you know, that's what Star Citizen's all about, right, guys? It's all about the beauty shots, nothing to do with the way the game plays, I guess. Moving into roadmap updates, roadmap Roundup in particular, 3.10 is starting to close up, and the second to last piece is now in polishing, and that's new targeting methodology. And they aren't really taking the time in these posts to talk about 3.11 yet, but I do expect to see a bit of that in the, I don't know, probably a few weeks from now. I doubt we'll have much from roadmap Roundup next week. But from the Reddit roadmap, we see that Bartender is starting to near a close, and for 3.11, there's minor progress going into things like improved throw and the 100i, and then some tasks being added to the refinery and cargo desks, which mean that there's lowering in the progress. And if you look at the number of tasks here, it looks like at launch, we're just going to get very visual things, which is very standard for Star Citizen, in my opinion, unfortunately. But what I expect for something like the refinery deck would be a very cool looking area, but the same panels that we deal with in terms of refineries at landing locations now. I would love to see the refinery gameplay that they've talked about, where you actually refine ore and then get a processed ore out of it, but my expectations are low for that, but hopefully we will. Then moving on to video updates, we didn't have an ISC, but we did have an SCL, and they started out with nudging. So they talked about nudging in the, the guys that are on the show are the flight experience guys. So they start out with nudging, and this is something to do with how they're making fixed weapons more viable. So what does nudging mean?
Okay, so nudging does not mean that we kind of like put the bullets around the corner or anything like that. Every weapon on every ship has a convergence allowance, right? At the moment, that allowance is quite high for each weapon. It's like 8 degrees. So when you target something with fixed weapons or with any other weapons, and you don't fire the target, but if the target's really close to you, then you will see that your shots will cross over in front of you. That is convergence, and this is just an inherent property of the weapon. So they can gimbal, like a little bit of gimbling in each, right? So we're using that to help the fixed weapons finding the target. I know that people would say, "Oh, wait a sec, it's auto aim," but it's not really auto aim. So assuming I'm prepared, you have a ship flying in front of you, right? So this Hornet goes into this direction, then the predicted impact point will be here. Let's assume this is like the center of the predicted impact point. What we do is when your current aim vector is intersecting that, at some point we will start nudging the bullets towards the target, but it won't be like an instant swap, but it will be a fluent it will be a fluent ratio towards the target. So if you're really aiming good anyways, right? But if you're slightly offset, it will still nudge the bullet in this direction, but not perfectly. So it kind of like slowly fades them onto the target.
So how I understand it, and go back and listen to the part where he discusses your current aim vector intersecting with the convergence point. And what I think he means is if you're already working towards, like, going in the right direction, you're probably going to hit. They're just going to nudge you a little bit to make sure that you do hit. And I think that is very different from auto gimbal, even though it felt like their initial post explanation was it was basically auto gimbal but for fixed weapons. So this is more rewarding, and they did say this in the post too, is rewarding good aim. So when you're actually going to aim properly, it gives you just a little kick in the pants to make sure that you do aim properly. And I think this is good. I think this is a good step in the right direction to make fixed weapons more valuable, but they did touch on the fact that auto gimbal is still probably too powerful and needs to be brought back a little bit as well. Then they touch on subsystem targeting, and will we get any more targets in the future? Currently, we can only target engines, I believe.
We're definitely going to expand that out to pretty much all items on a ship. We're doing it in phases because we want to bring each classification of item you can sub-target online with appropriate behavior for when you shoot them or damage them. We've talked in the past about not being easily able to get to the items inside a ship. So the next thing we'll be bringing online will be turrets and maneuvering thrusters, most likely. So you can target another ship's turrets, take them out, target another ship's maneuvering thrusters, which will then have a big impact with everything we've talked about before. So,
and personally, I love this question because it should have brought an answer that touched a lot more on physicalized components, but unfortunately, the answer wasn't as promising as I would have hoped. So it seems like it's going to be a while before we start seeing the actual components, like a power plant that you can shoot at and render inoperable so you can board a ship, something like that. But the steps that they're taking do make a lot of sense. So they touched on things like turrets being the next subsystem to target and be able to take out. And given the fact that they focused on turret gameplay and making turrets more viable and dangerous, the fact that you would be able to take them out and destroy them is very important as well. So looking forward to that update. That should be coming in a future patch. That didn't seem like anything that was in 3.10. They do touch on something that is also very, very future, it seems like, and that's capacitor gameplay. And this is maybe something that's coming in 3.11. And yeah, we'll just let them discuss it here.
So capacitor gameplay as such is quite interesting for us, and we're going to have this both on the weapons and on the flight model later. It's like the concept of stamina, right? So if Star Citizen were a fighting game, right? At the moment, what happens in combat, everybody's just punching, right? There's no consequence in not punching, so everybody punches. For us, that means players can tape down their fire button all the time only with little consequence, and that will drastically change in 3.11 onwards. So you need to decide when to punch, you need to decide when to block, and so we're slowly going into that direction of having really short decision act loops, right? It's called OODA loops, like observe, orient, decide, act. So effectively using analyzing your situation, then deciding what you do, and then doing the stuff that you want to do, and having a lot of like small decisions and small loops in combat.
So a lot of the things they touch on are so vastly different from the typical Star Citizen experience we've been having for the last 6 years. In concept, what he's saying makes a lot of sense to me, seems fun, and should make combat more thought-provoking and maybe skillful by choosing certain decisions. Then you may or may not win a fight, like choosing when to shoot, choosing when to use your afterburners, things like that. But for in practice in Star Citizen, who knows? There's so many other factors like poor networking, poor frame rate, all these other things that may make these core changes that sound really fun may feel horrible. We'll have to see. Only time will tell. And then one of those things that they touch on next is an issue that I know I deal with, and I know most of the community deals with, and it's like, why don't you just fix this? And they touch on, like, why don't you just fix accelerations?
So that's a very specific measure. So it's hard to answer that because we don't know yet. Like we have a vision what combat should be, and we're gonna tune the ships towards that vision in the long term, right? Just saying increased accelerations might improve a certain aspect, but it might break other aspects of the game. The answer is we don't know yet. We'll see how in the following quarter the combat evolves and develops, and then we're going to decide what we're going to do with the accelerations. I mean, we don't want to just increase accelerations. We want to make a fun flight model. So maybe this whole topic is way too big to just being put in like in one single release with like one statement like, yep, let's cut back strafe or something like that. So we need more time to work on that. So and this happens over the course of the next quarter. So
okay, so Yogi's delivery here is scary, but for once it's actually what I want to hear. If they just increase accelerations, then we have the old flight model that we had before, and that had its own flaws. So the we don't know is a scary thing to hear, but it's what I think we need to hear, and it's what I want to hear. I want them to be honest. We don't know. They're trying things, and they will be balancing constantly every patch, maybe even interim patches, and they'll be doing that because this team is dedicated to doing that. That's why they're here. And, you know, the biggest thing to touch on is this patch will not be complete. 3.10 will not complete what they want for the flight model and flight and combat changes. That will be complete maybe in 3.11, probably in 3.12. So this is all something that they will have to implement what they think is going to make things fun as a whole, which will take time, and then take a look at it from a more macro perspective and go, okay, you know, this didn't work, that didn't work, we need to change this, we need to adjust that. But there's a lot of things, and they mentioned this in the video as well, that some things won't make sense. And it's because it's a prerequisite to something that's coming later, so we'll have to see. Now for the rest of the video, I'm only going to use these 3 clips. because this video is going to be really long, and I'm honestly really short on time for editing right now because I had some issues with recording earlier. So we're just going to kind of run down some other points that they made in SCL. People asked, will we be able to share pin targets with our party and org members? They said not in 3.10, and they made it sound a lot harder than it may seem. So it coming in like 3.11, that might not be possible either. They touched on EMP, that there'll be a lot of changes to it. In particular, they didn't like how turning that on in the HUD was very difficult and kind of a pain. They want to add it to the missile operator role. I don't know how this is going to work because most ships that have EMP are single-seaters. So the missile operator is you. So that one's weird. And things will be added to the HUD in relation to the EMPs in the future. Somebody asked, will you be able to glide without your engines on in atmosphere? So turn your engines off and glide around. They said yes, but you don't have any control because control's done through your engines and maneuvering thrusters. So we'll have to see with that. They want to add things like flaps and stuff like that in the future, which might simplify that whole thing. We'll have to see. And what'll be nice is you won't actually have to use your maneuvering thrusters in atmosphere because they have no real purpose. So you can kind of turn them off and remove wear and tear. One day we'll get jetpacks as well, but not like Mandalorian jetpacks. They're really for the purpose of ejection in atmo to prevent you from taking damage when you land. There'll be a vector arrow in 3.10. This is when you target another ship, it'll show you the direction that the ship that you're targeting is going, because it is actually difficult to see the ship. So the target HUD will show you the direction that they're pointing in, as well as a trail, so you can kind of determine where they might be going. Missiles are going to be a focus in 3.11, and drag will be a thing when your landing gear is down 1 day. 1 day is, who knows, soon TM, right? Then moving on to other updates, this is a little bit shorter this week, but we did have a really big post as well. So starting out, there was a lore update with the 6th Platoon and a Galactopedia update, but the main focus on this week was the 3.9 Postmortem. And they started out with Invictus, which was the main thing that happened in 3.9, unfortunately, but also fortunately. So they had way more players than expected, so this is very exciting. A lot of people are interested in Star Citizen. I've been saying the game can sell itself. Let's try to make the game sell itself. It's starting to happen. They made a ton of money as well, but it broke their legacy services that they were already in the process of updating, as we saw in the June monthly report, but it caused a ton of issues for 3.9, and we're gonna have a bad time, basically, is what they really highlighted in this post. And we're gonna experience issues, and because they want to put these services in sooner than later so they can work through those issues sooner than later. So they noticed that they weren't ready, and now they're gonna try and push those services in sooner than expected, so expect a lot of bugs with them. They also touched on just 3.9 as a whole. Prisons in particular was a big post where they mentioned in 3.10 they fixed the issue when leaving a prison. You no longer get stuck on the black screen. They added a mission or two to add a little bit more variety so you can leave not just by mining. And they did talk a lot about 3.11 and the future. For me personally, I don't really want to touch on this stuff much because they just haven't proven that they can keep those promises a week out, or a month out, or excuse me, a quarter out. That they can't really keep to those things. So, you know, you guys can take a look at the post. It'll be in the link in the description of what is coming in the future, but I would like to touch more on them when they're closer. The actor status system was also discussed here. In my opinion, this was the best implementation of 3.9, and they basically praised themselves in the post, and they deserved it. They also did talk about future stuff, like adding weight, which I assume will be related to the physical inventory system. That's also coming in the future, and mentioned in this post, as well as drug effects and more hazards coming that can kill us, more things that can kill us, oh no. And then they also just briefly touched on things like the Friend service, Arena Commander and Star Marine things, like they added VoIP to it, and round cycling, which was really awesome because I actually like playing Star Marine. I know I'm a masochist, I guess, but the round cycling allows a match to start with 2 players, and then maybe if one more joins, then there's 3, and then it keeps going every time you play. it puts you into another game, and then the lobby just builds and builds and builds, and there's actually a decent amount of players playing after a few rounds. Personal inner thought they touched on, new Babbage, stations around planets, more of Klesher Automated Prison, moons, and the Price of Freedom mission. So that was a very interesting post. I highly suggest all of you guys check it out, but I think the main meat was in that Invictus section of kind of what happened in 3.9, what went wrong, and what they're going to do to resolve the issues in the future. And I think that's going to leave it there for this week, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button. That's been really helpful for me. Leave a comment below and subscribe for more weeks in review. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next week. Have a great one.